Okay, great. Well, first of all, really quickly, thank you, Pater, for that introduction, and to Louise, Pater, and Mitch, and GDNYU for doing this. This is my first Pechakucha. I hope I'm saying it right, and I think the last presentation was great. I like the adrenaline rush associated with this format so far. So in that spirit, in the next 6 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about a great passion of mine, which is the human right to water. And to start off, you can see here some images of protests that took place in Detroit, Michigan over the past 2 years. And these were organized to push back against some very unjust government-mandated water shutoffs in the city. And as in Detroit, globally, the vast majority of situations involving water access denial affect impoverished communities, communities comprised of racial minorities, and very often communities impacted by political conflict, or in some cases, as I'll discuss briefly, armed conflict. But staying with domestic issues in the US for a moment, I'm sure you may have heard about the city of Flint, Michigan, not far from Detroit, in the news a lot lately. And Flint is making the headlines because exorbitant levels of toxic lead are catastrophically contaminating the water supply. So Flint's water is toxic, whereas a situation like Detroit, water is typically safe, but people haven't been able to get any consistent access to it in their homes. So it's sort of like pick your poison. Would you want to ingest levels of lead that could be 2,600 times higher than levels that are already deemed toxic in a place like Flint, or do you want to be denied access completely in a place like Detroit? And with that in mind, I want to switch gears a bit to situations outside the US abroad where people are facing both these poisons, if you will, simultaneously. And Syria is one example where water shutoffs have emanated from the political unrest there. Both ISIS and government forces are guilty of using water as a weapon, holding it in order to win and gain control of territory. And you'll see in a second a water access map of Syria. And when you look at that, you can see that the entire population that remains in the country is facing duress as a direct result of water access denial, which is severe in the majority of the nation. And the red areas on the map show the territories most severely affected, and this is worsened. This isn't even the most up-to-date data, but virtually no area is left untouched, and it's only continuing to get worse. Many researchers have concluded that drought was most certainly a key factor leading to the civil war that spurred the situation currently being faced in Syria, involving not only devastating violence in the country, causing so many to flee, but also a health crisis because of water and food shortages for those who have had to stay behind. And staying in the Middle East, but moving slightly southwest on the map, the Palestinian territories, namely the West Bank and Gaza, are some of the most profound cases of both water access denial and a dangerous water quality situation existing in the world today. Severe sewage drain-off that was caused by bombings of a wastewater treatment plant during the war that took place in the Gaza Strip in summer 2014 is just one water-related human rights issue plaguing Gaza today. And I do want to emphasize again the impact of protracted armed conflict on water access situations where infrastructure can't be stabilized. But I don't want to be entirely bleak because there are some successful approaches to address this overwhelming challenge. Some small examples include a 3,000 cubic meter purified water tank, and this one was installed by the UN Development Program and actually funded by the Japanese government. And in Gaza, switching back maybe to the more bleak side of things, you can see things like homemade water collection systems that are compiled out of used plastic bags to obtain rainwater for agricultural purposes, because the situation there involving an occupation and long-term armed conflict does prevent the formation of sustainable and reliable water networks. And similarly, coming back to the US, to Flint, Michigan, just a look at the drinking water in Gaza will indicate to you pretty easily that it's not too healthy. But you don't need to rely solely on visual evidence to be convinced that the water situation is dangerous and becoming more so. Children suffer from high levels of kidney disease, for example, because they're forced to drink water contaminated by sewage drain-off, and other health effects include ulcers from high fluoride intake and something called blue baby syndrome, which is a condition that results from the consumption of unfiltered water with high levels of nitrate, thereby preventing infants from absorbing oxygen. So this situation sort of has a magic for number of qualities that constitute a real recipe for water disaster. And then one is that it's an economically disadvantaged population, which makes them very vulnerable. Two, the occupation of a racial minority group. Three, the Gaza Strip is very overpopulated with 2 million people in a relatively small land area. And four, again, the area is in a state of violent long-term conflict that has prevented the formation of any kind of sustainable infrastructure. But I wanted to kind of give you the facts at this point, but moving ahead to long-term resolution and how this could be addressed, I think that would most likely have to involve either desalination of water from the Mediterranean Sea, or a lot of discussion takes place about integrating the Gaza Strip into Israel's very high-tech water infrastructure, and possibly or probably a combination of both of these might be the most successful approach. But I think that most importantly, reform of international law and humanitarian law specifically to make these solutions become lasting solutions is necessary. And switching gears one last time, I just want to wrap up by jumping to a different situation in Nepal, which, as you may recall, was devastated by a 7.8 magnitude earthquake last year. And Nepal, again, a lot of these factors are the same across the board, has a severely impoverished population, and even prior to this most recent earthquake, the country has been dealing with crippled water infrastructure and health issues on a massive scale. But the earthquake did spur an impressive humanitarian response that was able to successfully deliver water to many in Nepal, which I think can serve as a lesson and a model. One, to show that we can be doing more, and two, to question why should it take an earthquake to get water to those in need. The resources are there, the technology is there, so I think we could be taking a mitigative approach rather than waiting for disaster to inspire these responses. And I just want to end that, we are here, nature and design, hopefully this fits into that theme somehow, but talking about nature and environment, global warming is only going to increase drought and worsen situations in Syria, Nepal, Gaza, Ethiopia, Iraq, places across the world. So I just want to hammer the point again that success can be achieved when we take a preventative approach to water access denial in quality situations, rather than allowing shutoffs or bombings or earthquakes or whatever it may be to create catastrophic emergency situations.